Oh no, you can go whenever you want. Sorry? Possibly in a minute. I can't. I have to go onto it.
I'll just go onto it and monitor it then.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going to use this as the remote. I'm going to use this for the crowd.
Yeah.
The crowd, you know what I mean?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? No sign. Can you hear me all right? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Great stuff, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our special general meeting of the Dons Trust. We are here to go through two resolutions that have been proposed. But first of all, let me just make you all welcome and say the bar's open. I hope you've got a drink. We'll try and make this a fun and interesting evening and discuss these issues with you. We've got a few apologies from our side. Andrea sends her apologies. Anna Batista sends her apologies. Graham Price sends his apologies tonight. They can't be with us for various reasons. And I'll get straight in, if you like, to item 2 on the agenda, which is to talk about the proposed resolutions. The details have been sent out, and you should all have had those in what are called the blue papers. The first resolution is about creating super restricted actions to increase the protections for our key club assets, namely sale of any freehold interest in Plough Lane, any ground relocation from Plough Lane, and the name of the club, including the nickname and or its status with the FA. And the second one is about changing the minimum current ownership of AFCW PLC, which is the company that directly or indirectly owns the football club AFC Wimbledon's and all its assets, such as the ground. Currently, the Dons Trust must maintain a minimum of 75% plus one share of voting rights in AFCW PLC. And following further consultation, we have agreed to change the wording of this restricted action to say any action that results in the society's ownership of or voting capacity in AFCW PLC falling below 50.01%. So that change would have been circulated by email last week. Those are the two resolutions we're here to discuss. So I suspect the best thing to do is to get right into the questions from the floor and online about these resolutions. So would anyone like to start us off with a question? Otherwise it could be a very short evening. If you could just say your name and then your question, please.
Karen Bowles. So I've read the papers. I see that the AFC Wimbledon PLC have changed their articles of association, whatever, so there can be no more than one person owning more than 15% of the shares. Is that something that actually would stand up in law? The reason I ask is because at 25%, you've got a lot more power.
It's a protection that we're putting in place in writing, so in as much as we can enforce it, we will. It's difficult to enforce more than one individual sort of banding together to do something, I suppose. So that's a difficulty with that. But as far as it's possible to stop the sale of shares to one person to have more than 15% of the equity, then that's the provision that we put in place.
Josh.
There's a few points I might raise later, but I think a simple question we'd like answered is, why do you want to go to 50+1? And what's the plan behind that? You can't just say, we're going to 50+1. What's the plan? What's the backup? What's the strategy that's going to follow?
Thanks for the question.
Thank you for the question. We've written a lot about why, and I'll can appreciate that not everyone likes to read everything, so I'll kind of go through some of it briefly now. There's a number of reasons, and I'll talk about the strategy thing as well. So the club and the trust have together worked on a new strategy, which some of you will be aware of. It's on kind of some of the documents, and that's going to be released in more detail very, very soon. And there's loads of planning behind that strategy document as well. And the vision that we both boards have agreed to is for us to try and reach the championship as a sustainable, fan-owned community football club. And I think that's gone through loads of kind of consultation, loads of processes, loads of meetings with the boards and the club and that kind of thing. And that's the strategy for the club that everyone's kind of signed up to.
Are you seriously saying that going to 50+1 and raising, there's no, going to 50+1 isn't going to guarantee any money whatsoever. It will open the door to some more investors. But I find it astonishing propaganda that the 9 or 10 million pounds that selling all that equity would raise will get us into the championship. Please.
Sorry, can I?
It's financially impossible. Even if we got there, we couldn't stay there.
The equity alone will not get us to the championship. That's clear. When you look at the numbers, of the playing budget, and I don't think that's not what we are. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think that's what anyone else is saying either. The second part of my answer was going to be the why we're doing it now. And that's about that bond debt that you allude to as well. It's about the £9 million or so of bond debt that we have. That we've got 3 million coming down the line in kind of 2 years' time that we need to pay back. We've got more coming down the line after that, and we've also got the 400k-ish per year interest payments to pay, which is a big kind of drag on our budget year on year, isn't it? So let's be really, really clear, because you're right to challenge it, and I appreciate the challenge. Let's be really clear. That's a vision. Lots and lots and lots of things have got to happen for us to get to that vision, right? 50+1 isn't. Sorry,
to be selling it to our supporters that will get us to the championship, as you have been doing. It's irresponsible. It's financially irresponsible.
I don't think that's what we've been doing. I don't think that's what we've been doing. I'm sorry if you feel like that's the language we've been used, or that's an interpretation, but that's not the interpretation. I think when you read the documentations, we've been really honest with people, and transparent about the trade-offs, about the opportunities, about the risks that are involved, about the risks of us voting for this, about the risks about us not voting for it. There are no guarantees. This is football. These are businesses. There are no guarantees. If we vote to go down to 50+1, if we sell chunks of equity, that does not guarantee us anything. What it does give us is an opportunity. It's a lever for us to pull to create better conditions for our financial conditions for our football club.
But what else you've acknowledged? By it's been dangled to the supporters. What else does the plan comprise? What else are you going to deliver if you get to 50+1?
Well, it's for AFC Wimbledon PLC and the club and everyone, as overseen by the trust, to deliver. So I'm not going to deliver it, but I'm going to, if I'm here, I'm going to help do oversight to help that happen. But what it is about, continuing to invest and grow our academy, about continuing to invest and grow in Plough Lane, about generating match day and non-match day revenues from here. About continuing to do the work in our community, investing in our women's team to improve. That's what the vision does, and as part of that, there's a long-term goal, and it's a long-term goal for us to try and reach the championship as a fan-owned sustainable football club. Let's be 100% clear, the vote to 50+1, if we pass that vote now or whenever in the future, it does not get us there tomorrow. It does not guarantee that. That's 100% clear, and I'd like to think that there's nowhere where we have said that. What I think it does, it gives us the best opportunity available to us today to do that. It's one of the building blocks that allows us to do that. You can challenge that. That's up for challenge, like all these things, right? Because we're talking about the future, so there's no guarantees. That's definitely challengeable. But that for me, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that was the best way for us to do that. But as I say that, there are no guarantees at all, and you can't guarantee it because it's football.
I won't hog the mic, I promise, as I've been accused in the past. One other point I'd make, I am not relentlessly against 50+1. What I want to come with it is more protection. And I want all the possible protection. And I have been repeatedly told by members of the PLC and the Dons Trust Board that we have all the possible protection. I'd like you to consider this scenario and tell me the answer. The PLC proposes extending the stadium or buying a training ground, so the DTB persuades its members to approve borrowing against the freehold of the stadium. We borrow the money, the project goes wrong, we fail to make the repayments, and we renege on the debt. What happens? In my view, and this was confirmed by a member of the Finance Committee, that we will lose the stadium. A super restricted action won't prevent that. We lose Plough Lane for the second time. Now, is that correct? If we borrow against the freehold of Plough Lane and we renege on the debt, do we lose the stadium?
Is this actually? Yes. I thought I'd take this because I've been around football for long enough and seen enough of this sort of stuff to know, to have a damn good idea about what tends to cause it. When it comes to, for those who don't know me, I did spend 11 years working for Supporters Direct. One of the reasons that I started working there was because of my involvement on WISA, and I worked through some of the probably most hairy periods in English football and in European football as well, actually, around these sorts of environments where clubs are being asset stripped, losing control, all that kind of stuff. The problem, sometimes if you go back and look at where it's happened, like it did with Wimbledon Football Club, you'll find frequently the protections were inadequate. We know about the covenant, for example, which we thought was pretty rock solid, but it turned out there was a massive loophole in it that meant it could be bought out. Lots of those others where, for example, clubs lost assets or they lost supporter control of a football club like Chesterfield. Well, Chesterfield was a legacy of no development of a stadium in about 125 years. So, there's another cause there. You've got the general financial conditions of football, which created a lot of the problems, particularly around fan-owned clubs and those who attempted to be sustainable. When it comes to Wimbledon, and I suppose I can sort of be a bit more objective than most people because of what I do for a living still, is I think there are two issues here. One is the amount of protection we need, which we absolutely must have in order to ensure that we don't lose this stadium again, because that does lurk for a lot of us behind everything that happens here. We're always a bit fearful of that. So we do need to have those protections. But I do think to some extent these processes are about learning to trust ourselves with these things, because what happened to us over a long period of time created what we are. When we have to make decisions like this, we're more nervous than most people, which is why, for example, already we've made that change within the PLC rules. And I personally speaking, I had to take a lot of persuading to agree to the 50% plus one vote, or the so-called 50% plus one vote. But my view is that, as Graham Price puts it, you need a series of levers and you need options. The problem, if I may finish, Peter, is that it gets boiled down to very, very binary choices, which is, so either you're going to make yourself vulnerable to losing the ground because you borrow and it all goes wrong, or we don't do it at all. And the truth is, as you know, Peter, you've been around football for long enough yourself, is you have to make calculated decisions and you do have to take calculated risks. And the point is to ensure that the calculation you make is very, very, very well thought through. And this is an incredibly well thought through calculation. It's not a binary choice of we get the money in, we get to the championship, and to reduce it to that, I think you know that's not true, because there are enough people around the business who would never make that kind of decision, precisely because of the reason you are nervous about the decision. So I think we do need to talk this through properly. We need to understand what we're doing, but I think we also need to learn to trust ourselves a bit more, and to realise that actually over the 22 years since we took control of our football club, we have generally made very good decisions around, especially around assets, protection of assets, purchase of assets. So, I just thought a bit of context might be useful.
I've given you time to answer that. You actually haven't answered my question. And the question was, will we lose control of the club if we do? And we will.
Peter, no, can you just stop for a moment? That's not what I did. That's not what the question needs to be. That's not the question we're trying to answer here, which is, could something bad happen? Could something bad happen? Yes, could do, because we could have completely the wrong people in charge. They might make completely the wrong decisions. We might borrow against an asset in a really stupid way. But then that's the risk we took taking.
Okay.
Peter, can I finish, please?
I'm going to agree with you.
Okay.
I want to agree with you. What we need is more protection in place. I'm not against 50 plus 1. We need the ultimate, we need every possible protection in place. And one thing I have proposed, and it's been strongly opposed by the Dons Trust Board, is something equivalent to the Pitch Owners Club that Chelsea have. I'm sorry.
One at a time, please.
Relevant and misinformed. We have had this conversation. We produced a paper. Supporters directed the research. They made it very clear that actually a CPO structure was inferior to the structure we have. Okay, so if anyone wants to read it, it's on the website. And if you want to continue to argue that the up is down, then you go right ahead. But unfortunately, you're actually wrong, because all of the facts are laid out very clearly, and the protection is better.
I will accord you all the courtesy of ending now. All I know, and you've confirmed it by your silence, if we borrowed against the freehold, we would lose control of the club, and if we had a pitch owners operation of some kind in place, that would prevent it.
Peter, thank you. I think you've made your point you wanted to make. We'll just go to a question online, and then we'll come back to the room.
Thanks. So we've had a question from Peter Bowles. He says, what is the value of the super restricted action that protects things we'd never want to change when the threshold for losing control of the club is lower? It seems like rather a pointless gesture.
Anyone want to answer that question, or shall I? The super restricted actions give an extra level of protection, which is something I think people were asking for in the room. They're not something that we have made a recommendation on the trust that you should support. They're there to answer the questions that were raised in previous meetings about providing additional levels of protection for the club.
Thank you. Sean McLaughlin, Don's Trust member and everything else. Kevin, thanks for your comments there. Interesting accusing people of dominating the meeting when you spent quite a lot of time not answering the question. I've always found in business that it is sensible to answer the question and then possibly answer the question that you think should have been asked. I'll answer it, because I've worked with company law for a long time. Yes, there is a danger it could be taken away from us, and it's a valuable piece of real estate. The second thing I'd just like to say to James, I think you need to look at the communications that have come out. I refer to the email on the 21st of August to members, come together. And it says, I think the quote is, let me find it, this season with some big votes coming, up to whether we look to change the level of ownership, to be able to invest more in the club and push for our aim of promotion to the Championship, or remain as we are and try to grow in other ways. How that is not linking the two inextricably in the first communication that went out, I do not know, and you should know that went out. The second point I'd make from a just constitution point of view is, why was the club sending that and not the Don's Trust board that is in charge of the Don's Trust and report to the membership? I'll have a further question later.
So I guess take the second one, because I think it was aimed at me. The club said I think that email came with a member's handbook and some details on how to get your discounts from the club shop and how to get discounts off club tickets, as well as the Don's Trust members handbook as well. So we were happy for that to come jointly from the club and the trust. I kind of, there wasn't lots of detail about the vote in there. It didn't carry any official papers or anything like that in there. So, kind of really, I was happy for that. And I think, the board were happy for that to come out jointly from the club and the trust to our members, to our joint members. The second point, the important words in there are, kind of our aim and push for the Championship. There's no guarantees in there. Nothing we've written has any guarantees in it. I think we've been really transparent. I am always up for challenge on language and words. And I will hold my hand up if I think that, if we made mistakes on words, that challenge is absolutely fine. But there's no guarantees in that language at all.
I think I'd add to that.
That is true, but again, you need to look at what was sent out. It wasn't sent jointly, it was sent by AFC Wimbledon. And it's inextricably linked, the idea in people's minds that you reduce the ownership, you get into the Championship or gives you a much better chance, which is a fallacy completely. And it should never have been sent out. I've shown it to other people, nothing to do with AFC Wimbledon, all of who worked in the city, and say, you cannot say that. If this had been a public share issue, you would have been taken to court and fined by the regulators. It's wrong in every single level, and by saying it was sent jointly, you're just digging the hole that you didn't even know it was sent in the first place.
I appreciate the challenge. I think it is a different thing. Happy to have a conversation more about it. We knew it was being sent by the club. Like I say, it was it kind of had a whole range of different bits of information in there. All the detailed information about this vote has been sent from the trust to our members.
I might say another couple of words about this idea of our vision, because it is important. It inextricably links our
success as a football club with sustainability and fan ownership. They're not negotiable elements of that vision. And if you set your vision to become a sustainable fan-owned community-based football club that can reach the championship, you set the target high for success in football. If you set your target lower, if you set your target to be at the top of EFL2, then you might struggle to get to the top of EFL2. Setting the vision at a high level allows us to aim high and put in the ingredients that we need across the whole of the club, from the academy to the football teams, to the revenue operations, to the stadium, to the debt management and finance. It allows us to put all that in place and think about it in that context over a multi-year period, because you can't just magically get to the championship. You first of all got to become a winning team in EFL2 that's at the top of the table. Then you've got to get promoted. Then you've got to remain in the next league. You've got to become sustainable in EFL1. You've got to get to the top of EFL1. And only then, after several years, might you get an opportunity to get to the championship if all the ingredients are right. But when I did my A-levels, that was a very long time ago now, I tried to calculate to get 40% to get my pass score. And guess what happened to me? I didn't get it. If I'd have tried to set my target higher at 70, 80%, I probably would have done better. And I think setting a good target for a vision, therefore, is a good thing to do. I think we've got another question online.
Sorry, can you speak through the microphone just so that those online can hear as well? Otherwise they can't hear you.
I think we need to stick to the questions that are being asked and the answers to be given. Thank you for explaining how we get up through the leagues. I am fully aware of how that works and think probably every single fan of AFC Wimbledon is, because we've done it. I'm just making the point that it was misleading and wrong to link those two in the very first communication. That's my view, and you can talk to me about how you've got a longer-term strategy, fine. It was noted in the early September board meeting it was due to be signed off shortly, but it's still not yet ready, so I wonder what's happening there, because I had expected to see it. But I think we'll move on, because I think I've made the point. Kevin's not come back on it, but I hasn't disagreed that there is a chance we could lose the stadium.
Thanks for your point. We are just about ready to publish the strategy document, but it didn't quite make it for tonight. It was a bit ambitious of us to try to have it ready for tonight. There's an awful lot going on, so I can only give you an apology for that. We will have a version of that available for you as soon as we possibly can. I think you're going to love it, because I do, but obviously that will have to wait until that comes out.
Yeah. Angus, sorry, can I just chip in? So, just to be clear, I'm sitting here as Don's Trust Treasurer, so I'm not on the Don's Trust board, but I'm very much involved in the Don's Trust finances, in particular the bonds, and I also chair the finance committee of the club. So just to touch on that point about borrowing against the stadium and losing the ground, can I just remind you that we had a loan secured on the ground, a rather large £4.5 million loan with MSP, which we managed to finance at a horrific interest rate, and I'd much rather we hadn't had to take that loan out, but we did, and we refinanced it, and we removed all security against the ground, and now in place of that we have more plough lane bonds where they are not secured against the ground. So as Kevin said, there are no guarantees in life, but all I can say is that we have had a period where we have had a significant loan secured on the ground. We repaid that loan, we removed the security, and I believe that if we were in a scenario in the future where in order to fund a training ground, we had to take out a loan secured on this ground, we would consider it. I would hope that we wouldn't go down that route. I would hope that we would work on a deal with a third party and with the council to see how we could finance that training facility. We're actually in the middle of meetings with Merton Council at the moment on that very subject, and I would be very hopeful that we would come to a position where we were not taking out a loan secured on this ground. But I think that the team that are working on it, which would be a combination of the Developments Committee and the Finance Committee, would be putting a business plan together for any such development that gives us the best options in terms of minimising costs and, if possible, avoiding any security over this ground. Andrew Barrow, who leads the Development Committee with Nick Robertson, was very clear when he joined us that when we went to any developer to talk about building out this stadium or getting a training ground, etc., we would be going to financial partners saying, we have no cash, we can't borrow any more debt, we don't want security over this ground. And those would be the three principles that we would be operating from with any partner. That isn't easy, obviously, because it limits our options, but I'm confident that as an organisation that we can put a good business plan together that would be approved by the PLC and the Dons Trust Board for any significant development like that. So I hope that goes some way to answer that question. Obviously, anything can happen in life, but I like to think that we have evidenced our ability to manage a loan secured against the ground successfully relatively recently.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Michelle. We've got a question from online.
Yeah, we've got quite a lot of questions coming online, starting with Matthias. He's got two questions. What is the backup plan if one day we as the Trust need to sell a portion of shares to financially help the club, and we wouldn't be able to because we don't have any more room to sell equity? The second part of that question is why the change must happen now. Do we have any investors targeting ourselves today?
I'll take the first part of that. Let's take the second part of that first. So we don't have any investors lined up. I think we've said that quite a lot. We have the Finance Committee, the PLC, have been out kind of talking to investors in the past, and for the circa 6%-ish that we've got available at the moment, and kind of we've had various barriers that have been well kind of highlighted with those where they've not been able to come to fruition. The one successful minority shareholder we have, obviously, that everyone knows about is Nick Robertson, and that's the kind of model of investor that we'd be looking for in the future. Graham, who isn't here because he's not feeling very well, has used the words kind of stewardship equity. That's the kind of investor that we'd be looking for. Why we think the time is now is because by passing this vote, it gives us a clarity that we can go to the market, we can go to potential investors and say, kind of our fans have said they are comfortable of us selling no lower than this level. This is the kind of equity we would have available. You can't have more than 15%. These are all the controls around it. Are you interested? It gives a clarity for people to go out there and for us to kind of actively market that investment. And the first part was, what is the plan? We're so far away from that scenario. We haven't approved the equity. We haven't sold any equity. And I think it's worth highlighting as well that if this vote passes and the second vote passes, we only have permission from members to sell 6% of shares in AFC Wimbledon PLC. It is still a Category B restricted action for us to sell any more shares in the PLC. So we would, at that point, if members pass this vote, say the minimum we can ever hold is 50.0.1, we can then go out to the market, have that conversation, we can talk to investors. We still have to come to members at that point to get permission to access whatever percentage over that circa 6% we have shares. So there is still that extra control from members in place there. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, James. I think we've got a few questions from online, so we'll just take a few of the online ones first.
Sean Fox says, can we be clear why we feel 75+1 was necessary when we set up the PLC, but it is now okay to go down to 50.01. What has changed?
I'll take that. Yeah, I think it's really. I think we talked about the risks and the trade-offs around that 75% plus one, and it being all about the special resolutions. So at 75% plus one of voting shares, which was the original, not the original rules, which were the rules that we've had in place for a while now. It means we can pass those special resolutions ourselves without anyone else. So the DT says we want to do this, it happens. Basically, those special resolutions they're important. They're very specific things like issuing new shares, changing the articles of association. I've put a list on the website if you want to read it. I won't go through that now. By reducing those rules, by reducing that 75% plus 1%, it means that we can't do that on our own. So it means that we would need the minority shareholders to come with us to do that. So that's why it was set up originally. There is a trade-off here if we do that. There is a trade-off that means we can't pass those special resolutions. Now, just to be clear, because I've heard some stuff where they've got confused, this is very different from our restricted actions. The Don's Trust restricted actions are very, very different from the special resolutions. And I know, kind of, it gets complicated. There's similar words used in different contexts. I know some of the audience are, absolute corporate finance and governance experts. Some of us aren't. But the Don's Trust restricted actions aren't touched by any of this, kind of any of the special resolution stuff. The special resolutions are for the PLC only, and it means that we couldn't pass them on our own. We would need our minority shareholders, of which, kind of there's a variety of them, and, kind of potentially more if we pass this, then we need them to come with us to pass those special resolutions.
Ian Harrison says, what mechanism would we have to remove any new investors that may bring reputational damage to the club by their actions, either in relation to the club or in their other private activities from the board, or force them to sell their shares, given they may have significant shareholdings?
I suppose at the basic level, assuming that someone who had more than 10% or 15% of the shares, that person would almost certainly be expecting a board seat as part of their share deal. If someone therefore owned those shares and was a director in the company and they were behaving inappropriately, then the Don's Trust could remove them as a director, because the Don's Trust board and the members have the power to appoint all of the directors in the PLC. So I think that's the most obvious thing that you would do. You would take any influence away from them in terms of their ability to influence decisions.
Thanks, Michelle. There's a few more questions online, so let's carry on.
Can I just add to that one?
Oh, yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Just to reiterate the point that James made earlier, that if this passes, members, the Don's Trust still gets to vote on whether to sell any shares. In doing so, I would expect the name of that person to be known. And so if there was somebody who came forward who was obviously not somebody we would want involved in the club, then we, the membership, could vote that down, that sale down, even if we thought that in other respects it was the right thing to do. If it's wrong because of the person seeking to buy that shareholding, we could vote it down. That doesn't answer the point about what happens if they become a wrong and after they've invested. That's something that's dealt with by what Michelle has just said. But yeah, we still have that protection to be able to say, actually, yes, we've agreed that we will potentially sell shares, but we're not going to sell them. Sorry, I was just indicating somebody in the audience, and I didn't mean to. We will not sell them to you.
Thanks, Alex. Before we go online, let's have David Cox.
Hello. Yeah. Sorry, it's very much on the theme that we're discussing here, and a topic that was raised, and I don't think was answered fully by a co-member over here, about the fact that Don's Trust says somebody can't own more than 15% doesn't stop someone actually owning more than 15%. It doesn't stop people working in partnership and coming together. And technically, if somebody, we talk about Nick shares in stewardship, should he fall upon hard times and want to sell his shares, 49.9% of the Dons Trust and its influence and ability to make decisions would be owned by external parties. I don't think anyone has fully explained. Yes, people talk about what protections you think you're putting in place, but legally, what advantages would that give a consortium who owned 49.9% of the club, or the trust, sorry, over our finances, our stadium, and our future, and our ownership?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in there, isn't there? The 15% is set in the PLC Articles of Association, so no one individual can own more than 15% of the club. Now, you're right, that doesn't stop people grouping together. In theory, we're talking, as we're doing, and is it right to do, we're talking like lots of steps of hypotheticals here, aren't we? Because we're trying to kind of cast into the future to see what any potential traps in this might be, which is the right thing to do. But what we have to do is we're going on like thought experiments, basically. About,
well, not really, because at the moment we don't have to have that thought experiment because 75 plus 1 is the limit.
Yeah.
But if we make it 50.1, then these things become possible.
Yep.
So our job as owners, members, is to protect ourselves.
Yeah, 100%.
And therefore, you have to think, you make it sound like a thought experiment as though we're freestyling it. Our job is to think about the unthinkable, because unfortunately, for most of us, if not all of us here, the unthinkable already happened once.
Yeah. No,
and therefore, we don't want it happening again. So tell us what happens if 49.9% of the shares owned by someone who could become hostile.
So it can be owned by an individual. So just to be 100% clear on that, that group, should they exist in the future, don't affect the Dons Trust's democracy in any way, shape or form, don't affect the Dons Trust's restricted actions or our control over the club. We would always own the majority of the club. So that means we can appoint directors, we can control the board of the PLC, which is, which is essential and a really strong protection. What we couldn't do is pass those special resolutions that we talked about earlier. So it's up to members to decide whether that is a trade-off that they're happy with, basically.
It was a really good point. It was a phrase you used, thinking the unthinkable, as members, that's our job. And that's why we're going through this process. I think the bit that I was kind of trying to caution against was the sense that I get sometimes that we don't quite trust ourselves. And I get that. That's sort of part of democracy. You put people in positions of power like we do on the board, and there's a degree of trust we have to exercise over those people. Do we trust them to make the right decision? But, that again, that's why we're looking to have the processes we've got and all the things we're doing, because we have to be thinking these things through properly and going through all of the technical issues and the possibility. But we also have to, at some point, say to ourselves, do we make a decision to grow and accept that there might be trade-offs in that? And are we prepared, when we have these thought experiments, our meetings and our conversations as members and fans, are we prepared to say, okay, that's the risk we're prepared to take? That's the big question.
I mean, on that point, we choose at 75% not to put anyone in power. That is the conscious decision the membership took, and to the best of my knowledge currently has taken, unless someone tells me otherwise. We don't put people in power. We elect people to represent and be our mouth. That's what I meant. Yeah, well, it's not what you said, sorry. But that's a change that's being proposed. because there is a power dynamic shift legally in going from 75 to 50.1. And unless someone can tell me what you can do if that 49.9 should fall, should I manage to get a group of people together, I'm looking around the room, put a few bob together, we buy that 49.9% and then decide to become super hostile, can you really protect yourselves and the rest of us?
I mean, interesting. I was just talking to Michelle, and she pulled up the shares, the distribution of shares, to get the kind of 49.9%. You're talking. So you'd have to persuade people like my dad, who bought £90 worth of shares in 2002, or my mate, who was the chair of the Swindon Town Supporters Trust, who bought £90 of shares. Sorry, 2003, wasn't it? Because they supported what we did. Lots of people like that you'd have to persuade. Then you would have to get, it reminds me a little bit of the, when we were talking about buying Kingsmeadow in 2003-4, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember there being the conversation about when Ron Nodes was still alive. It might have even been, I think he owned an underlease at Tooting and Mitcham, and someone raised the spectre of Ron Nodes getting enough members in, or enough shares in, to asset strip us. Now, I'm not saying that, therefore, I just think it's all ridiculous and no one would ever do that. But from my experience, the organisation required to do something like that is quite phenomenal, if not impossible. If it's membership, which I know you're not talking about, you're talking about economic ownership of shares. If it's membership, the board can stop membership. It's permitted to cease membership if it notes patterns that are concerning, or people joining that can't actually sign up to the membership, the code of membership, right? The constitution. So that's a bit of a block there. Then when it comes to the actual shares, well, then you've got this huge bundle, lots of bundles of people, and that takes the political organisation that takes is quite phenomenal. It's not mere economic power, because like I said, you've got my dad, you've got Paul, the fellow at Swindon, you've got all these other people, you've got the Cedars lot. So to be able to do that and pull together a block like that, but it's pretty impossible, pretty much impossible, I would say. But again, I like the point you made about thinking the unthinkable. We have to think those things through, because I do think we have to reassure ourselves that either, no, well, that's actually just not really going to happen, or what happens if it does, is there something we can put in place to ensure that we protect ourselves? And that's where I got to the point where I was satisfied with this, that I felt that the trade-off for me was okay to do, because I felt we would have enough without binding our hands too much. But again, the reason we're here having this discussion is because the members make the decision. And as you rightly said, we put in place 75.1 because that's how we decided to do it. If we make another decision, that's up to us to make. And that there is no strong arming from here. There's no propaganda from here. It's just laying out the case, and we're trying to have the conversation. So, I just think there's a lot more to take to get to a point where someone could get even an aggressive minority bloc.
And just to add on that, on the actual numbers as at September, in terms of ownership, 30% of the shares are owned by minorities. So 10% Nick Robertson, the Cedars Group, the original minority shareholders, plus a few more that topped up, Ananth from Malaysia. So currently 30% of the ownership is in quite a pot of different people, all of whom are fans of the club. So you'd have to, in order to get 49%, you'd have to persuade them all to sell. And they might do, if you offered them a huge price, they might do. But I'd like to think that all those original fans that are, put their money in at the time of Kingsmeadow, put their money in again here, they did that because they believe in fan ownership, not in selling out for a fast buck to some developer or third party.
Thanks. Question behind David.
we go. Before my question, just to Kev's point about people organising, 15% maximum shareholding per person, 3 times 15, 45, gets you pretty close to 49 without having to do very much organising. You only need 3 people to organise.
Buy that block of shares though. All those dispersed shares, they would have to buy them all.
Yeah.
Get control of all of those shares.
That,
those individuals would have to be persuaded to sell their shares in blocks. The seeders lot would have to go over. You're talking about a lot of organisation because those shares are in £90 blocks like my dad owns and like my mate Paul owns. So I get your point, but actually it's a lot more complicated.
I don't think that's that hard, and that's happened at other clubs. And you don't need that many abstentions before 45% is enough to carry votes. But that wasn't actually the point I was going to make. It was just when you said a lot of organisation, 3 times 15 isn't very many people to get organised together. What I was actually going to say was many of us have been asking for quite a long time for a pros and cons document in the build-up to this vote. And actually a lot of the board have done brilliant jobs on things like podcasts and explained a lot of the financial pros and cons. What we've not really heard until tonight is particularly the legal risks, the legal pros and cons. Why do we not yet have that in a written document? I'd say it's been some really good descriptions tonight, particularly James has been brilliant describing it tonight. But we need it in a written document before people can be asked to vote on it. Secondly, and I know this is an if, because we've all heard that there isn't someone waiting in the wings with the money. But if someone suddenly appears and invests this money, we're talking ballpark 10 million coming in, roughly, and correct me if I get the maths wrong, but just ballpark 10 million coming in. We don't yet have a strategy document of what we're going to do with this 10 million that may come in, but we've heard tonight that we're going to pay off Don's Trust bonds with it. We're going to get ourselves a championship level budget with it. We're going to get ourselves a training ground with it. We're going to do all sorts of other things with it. I can see the head shaking. I know why the heads are shaking, but we need the strategy document. We're being asked to vote on whether we want to sell down to 50.01 without a strategy document of what we would do with this money. So why are we being asked to vote on something without either being given the legal risks of voting on it or the strategy of what we're going to do with this money if we are lucky enough to get investors to give it to us?
Good questions. Let me take the first one first. In terms of the legal risks and kind of the stuff about special resolutions and that's all in the documentations we've produced. It's not it's not outlined with here's the pros, here's the cons, but there's I think it feels fairly transparent and fairly clear. I'm happy to recut in any way the stuff we've written. Happy to go over that in more detail for anyone who's asked and kind of for members. We've got the advantage of having 3 weeks to the voting period is there's lots of times to continue to talk to people about it, but I do think that stuff is in there. Kind of happy, like always, like I've said already, happy to hear where there's gaps and try and fill those gaps as quickly as we possibly can. On the strategy document question, it's a good challenge. I think the strategy document is published and is approved by the boards. It's not published. It's approved by the boards. It's being published very shortly. I feel like we've done a good job in the financial update we did in the summer, the latest financial update we did of outlining, kind of the groundwork of where we are and what that money, if money came in, could do. The future vote we would need before we sell those shares gives us another opportunity to communicate that as well. So I think there is, kind of in the busy world of a football club that's got to make big decisions, I think there has been plenty of information and plenty of time. I get the challenge on the strategy document, I really do. But I think we have outlined more than we have for a long time anyway, and as clear as we can possibly can. Kind of as always, there'll always be gaps. The opportunities and the challenges. So I get it, but we have done some of that.
No, my point was I agree. You've done good job, or at least I'm not a finance person, people who know more about finance might disagree with me, but I think you've done a good job on explaining financial pros and cons of why we're being asked to take this vote. My concern is what we don't have is particularly clear legal pros and even more so cons of the risks of this. That's my personal opinion.
Sure. Thanks. You made a good point. I think Tim had his hand up first, Ivor. But look, Ivor, you've got the mic, so Tim's flagging you to go ahead. So go ahead, Ivor.
Hello. Oh, right, there we are. Okay, I'm Ivor Heller. Good evening, everybody. I've got a couple of points and something that I'd like to ask that might be awkward, I don't know. In discussions so far, I think it's been reported that a couple of members of the Dons Trust Board are actually against this idea. I know there's collective responsibility, but I also think on something like this, collective responsibility should go out the window. If board members are against this and don't like it, I think they should speak. I think they should stand up and be heard by the members. I really do. Sorry? Oh, no, I thought you were going to answer. Come on. All right, okay.
Just going to the loo, he's not walking off.
So that's the first thing. I'd really like to hear from other people on the board. At the moment, it seems like everyone, it's across the board. I don't know how collective responsibility stands on this, but it certainly shouldn't on something so major. I really don't agree with that. The other thing is, there's this 6% that's still hanging around that's not been sold. Since we've come to Plough Lane, I think we've inherited or we've built another 3,000 to 4,000 fans that come here on a regular basis, which is more than we were getting at Kings Meadow. The last big share issue way back when raised about $1.25 million back to buy Kings Meadow. Then we had a very dodgy mortgage, by the way, which we had to take out with Mr. Kosler. That was insanity, more so than MSP in my opinion, but we did it. Why don't we try and sell that to our fans right now, that 1.6 million? I think there are thousands out there that would like to own a share in the club. I think that's a good idea and should be worked on. If we could just get a little 1.6 million in, that would help, wouldn't it, along the way? Would it help?
Yeah, so it is definitely one of the things that the Finance Committee have been talking about. I have from time to time had individual requests to buy shares in PLC, and it's just not cost effective because by the time you've written a legal agreement to issue £1,000 of shares, it doesn't add up.
Yeah. Well, we got that the first time we did the PLC.
Absolutely, if this vote doesn't pass, we absolutely will be looking at a rights issue to try and sell it that way through our fan base.
I think we should do that.
I mean, the reality is when we were short on the money here for the stadium, we raised 2 million through Cedars and then we sort of hit a limit. Now, some would argue we didn't market it well enough, but then the bonds came and, my perspective is there's a lot more appetite for a product that gives people a return. Shares in the club don't really give you any return. We're not going to pay a dividend. And, being a very small shareholder, having a vote, you can't really influence very much, particularly when the Dons Trust has 75% or more. But yes, absolutely, we'll be looking at it. One of the things Graham Price and I have been talking about.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying about the shares are, we put in the first prospectus, basically, you're mad if you buy these shares because you're not going to get a return, but still people like that certificate up on their wall. So I really do think that there's something
and it is on the list to look at,
Good, okay. End of my points.
Can I answer Ivor's first point, or first question? I can't speak for anybody else sitting next to me. I am sceptical about the idea of selling more shares. I think collective responsibility goes as far as me saying this is what the board has decided and I will work as part of the board in order to make that come to fruition. I won't try and stymie it by being a roadblock. But I say I'm in favour of this, but I'm in favour of this for a limited number of reasons. And my main reason is because I want us to be able to repay our debts. We have debts at the moment which are broadly or exclusively friendly debt. They're debts to bondholders and the like, which basically means our fans. Some people who aren't our fans bought bonds. They're brilliant as well, but it's basically to our fans. We are currently in a position, flood notwithstanding, to be able to do enough business here on the football field and outside football to be able to pay off the money that is owed to bondholders in the coming year. We hope that we're going to be in a position to do that in forthcoming years as well. Some of the money to bondholders, they have very kindly agreed to roll over or to take out new bonds, or however it's technically done. That's effectively kicking the can down the road. It's helpful to us as a board, as a club, but it's still money that's owed. Ultimately, we're going to have to pay that money back. I want to make sure that we are in a position where the club is strong enough that we can afford to do that through our trading activities, whether that's off the field, whether it's player sales, whether it's match day income, whatever. But ultimately, we cannot guarantee that. To come back to the point, you've got no guarantees in football. So in order to do that, we need a backstop. To me, the potential to sell shares down to 50.01 is that backstop. I personally, one moment please, Ivor. I would personally only do so, only happily vote, still not happily, but I would only vote to sell shares in order to do that. I may be convinced to do so in other circumstances, but because nobody should take it, to answer Peter's point from the start, nobody should take it that if we sold these shares, we would get into the Championship. We could afford a training ground. We could afford this. We could afford that. It's all working towards our long-term strategy, and I accept that the strategy document isn't out yet. So yes, I am more sceptical than my colleagues, but I still believe that collective responsibility means I can't stymie it, and also that there are circumstances where I think this is the right thing to do, and therefore that's why I am going along with it.
Thanks, Alex. I think what you've done, just a sec, Albert, I think what Alex has done there beautifully is to explain just how nuanced some of this is, and that's a good thing. Thanks for that.
Can I just ask something back though?
Yep.
Before Hannah speaks, sorry, what you've just said there, Alex, and thank you for speaking as eloquently as you did, what you've said leads me to believe that the share issue that we're going to do to get down to 50+1 is solely to play the bonds back. That's what you seem to be hanging your hat on here, to get us debt free, and I'm not sure if that has ever been the intention of going down to 50+1 or not. I'd be interested to hear if it is.
For me, that is one of the reasons why this has been put forward, and that to me, speaking personally, I'm not speaking for anybody else here, but for me that is the most justifiable reason for if we have to sell shares. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, this is the mechanism that might allow that to happen with the support of the membership. But that's my personal opinion. It's not necessarily, I certainly don't speak for anybody else. I know that Hannah wants to say something.
Thank you.
I won't be able to be as eloquent as Alex, but it's a similar position that I'm in terms of the scepticism, and I feel slightly awkward saying it, but I think there's been some really important questions raised tonight by a very small number of engaged members. My concern, I suppose, lies, and I wasn't, the rest of the board know that I was anti opening up membership to season ticket holders at the time we did, coinciding with this vote. My concerns lie in some of the stuff that has been raised around what we're, I suppose, how we're framing and selling this to an unengaged membership as this is your way to get into the Championship, rather than what Alex is saying, and which I support, paying off the debt and and that kind of stability. So it's probably undermined some things tonight, because I know that like a lot of real hard work from the board has been put in, but that's my position. But again, we'll stand with the rest of the board to, so thanks for giving the opportunity to express how I feel.
Thanks, Hannah. I think it's important that you are heard as well. So can we go over to Tim, and then we'll do a bit more online, and then we'll have a break, and you can charge your glasses and ask us the next level of questions, like a video game. Tim.
Thank you. Tim Hillier. Firstly, a minor point, and I will probably be seen as too pedantic on this, but in the blue paper, we have 2 paragraphs number 3, 2 paragraphs number 4, and we've got the Roman numerals under the restricted actions B. The numbering's gone all over the place. 3, 4, 5 should actually read 1, 2, 3, and then on the final page, to it, very back page, 6, 7, 8 should actually read 1, 2, 3. And it seems like a small point, but when you're trying to read and cross-reference such documents, it does get a bit complex. But whoever did this has my entire sympathy, because I struggle also with formatting and numbering of such documents. So put that aside. Far more important is that Resolution 1 is designated in the agenda as being a restricted action number 9, and therefore category B. I would assert that changing the status is not, as number 9 says, addition of an item to restricted actions. Changing the status comes under amending Rule 22, and therefore is actually category A.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a lawyer, so this is an accountant's view of things, and I might have got it wrong. But I'd be interested to hear the views of the board on that. Thank you.
Anyone got a view on that? I think we'll have to consult. Maybe we can have a chat with you during the break, Tim, to understand that a bit more. We'll take a few more online questions, and then we'll break for a sec.
First online questions from Reese Wheeler-Kelly. He says, if we were to pursue converting existing bonds to equity in some serious way, would that still require going below the current 75% limit in order to achieve either in part or in full bond conversion? So could we convert more bonds into shares?
It's one of the options for bondholders on redemption, given that Michelle has been doing and we should all take the opportunity to thank her for the work she's been doing in dealing with bondholders. She's done an absolutely amazing job in contacting the £3 million of bonds that we've had due for redemption coming up. Michelle, do you want to go into a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of where we are right now, I'm very pleased to say that I've only got about £50,000 of bonds to chase out of 3.3 million. So if you're in that group, please make a decision. I've spent a lot of time phoning, emailing, quite a small number of people who just don't respond. But that aside, the exercise has been really, really positive, and we originally budgeted that we would have to repay 1.75 million of bonds. It's looking like that will be closer to 1.4, which is really good news. In terms of swapping for equity, I've got £118,000 of bonds that want to swap for equity. So that also gives you a bit of an indication that there isn't this groundswell of people wanting equity rather than bonds. And then we've got about 150,000 of donations to the club or the trust, which is fantastic. So so that's been really, really good. And certainly the work is almost done now for up to next June. I think we talked a little bit before about 2027, and the finance paper that we did in September was very much around, okay, it looks like it's all right for next year and we can pay the debts that we need to pay then. but that does have a big knock-on effect on our bank balance, or the PLC's bank balance, by June next year, and we will not have very much money left at that point because of the extra bond repayments we've had to make. So by June next year, you know, we'll not have a lot in the bank unless we do some major player sales in January, which I don't think anybody wants to do. And then we'll be going into spring 2027 with another 3.3 million of bonds to pay. And whilst I'm confident, having gone through this exercise, that we can get quite a lot of people to roll over, the difference for those bonds is that the interest rate on them is 6% already. So the bonds that are due next year, the average interest rate was just over 2%. So anyone that was dithering about whether they should roll over for another 5 years, I was able to say to them, look, you only had 2% this time, but now you can get 6%. And quite a lot of people have done that, which is fine. Obviously, it means our interest cost on those bonds will be higher. But it does mean we've got the money for another 5 years. But when you go to 2027, those bonds are already at 6%. So, and we don't want to offer them a higher rate than that. You know, obviously interest rates are going down, so you'd hope that 6% would still look a good rate by then. But it does worry me, with my finance hat on, that, you know, and I know I've said this before and people get annoyed with me, you know, there are company law protections and there's also being financially sustainable. And in League Two, most clubs are losing 1 to 2 million. Somehow we can't do that. And we've also got to find 400,000 for interest. And we've also got to keep putting some money away for the debt that's falling due. And that's a really, really big challenge. And, you know, all credit to the club team as a whole for trying to grow our revenues, trying to keep our costs down, doing everything they can to make the club a more sustainable business. But, you know, it's tough. It's tough. So that for me is why I would like this to happen now, because I would like us to have a bit more flexibility around repaying debt. And also we've got things like the third floor is still complete empty shell. You know, if we could fit that out for part office space, part premium hospitality, we might be able to generate some more revenue there. So there are other capital things that we'd like to do. Obviously a training ground is a much, much bigger project. And, you know, it's highly unlikely we'd be able to fund that ourselves in its entirety. But anyway, so that was a long answer, but...
And I think just to pick up on the second part of Reese's question as well, we've got 6% of equity to sell, so we'd only be able to convert up to 6% or whatever that precise number is of bondholders' equity anyway. So, you know, kind of if we can't ask all bondholders to convert to equity because we don't have the equity to sell as things stand at the moment.
Thanks. Next online question from Ian Harrison. He says, is there anything that can be done to prevent collusion between shareholders if 15% is on offer to individuals? For example, could 2 family members each purchase 15%? And might this affect how the club is run on matters of significance?
As far as I'm aware, on the, and I'm not the, you know, kind of Andrea spoke strongly on this at the PLC SGM or the DT SGM back in April time. There is nothing to stop collusion. You know, kind of we did look at, as far as I'm aware, when those rules were written, we looked quite closely at, you know, kind of what legal protections could be put in place to do that, and there aren't any. So there isn't anything in place to do that. Like we said, we can remove people from the board of directors. We can do things like that. We can not approve their initial vote of shares, but at that point, there isn't anything we can do on collusion.
Thanks, James.
Sorry, just to add, I think, and I will check the PLC rules, but I think it's the usual yourself or connected party. So from a family point of view, that's usually up, down, left, right. So parents and sons and daughters, or brothers and sisters, plus a business partner. So I don't think, but I'll check and I'll come back to you if that's wrong, that you couldn't have two family members both buying 15%. But you can't, if they were two unrelated parties, from our perspective, we knew nothing about them and didn't know that they had any connection, that's quite, I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to provide a protection for that scenario legally.
Thanks, Michelle.
Next online question is from Hazel Williams. She says, the business case that was laid out when we agreed to build the stadium is clearly not working, so what could we do to make operational changes that will bring in money to reduce our operating costs? This should not involve fundamental changes to our constitution.
I guess Michelle probably just outlined quite a lot of the answer to that question, I think, in terms of where the opportunity is to make more money from the stadium. We've got the new MD in place, James Woodruff, who's doing, kind of, from what we can see, is doing a fantastic job of increasing revenues. We've obviously had, kind of some well-documented challenges. Moved into the stadium during COVID, had some senior management changes along the way that have been, kind of held up our ability to generate revenue from Plough Lane. But I think we are all very optimistic, kind of, and then as soon as you say that, the pitch floods. But kind of broadly speaking, we're really optimistic that we've got the right people and the right levers in place to make the most of this, amazing asset that we've built.
Thanks, James. We'll do one more online one, then we'll have a break.
Sean Fox says, what guarantees do we have on how any monies will be spent? Equity for growth of the ground or capital expenditure is one thing, a casino investment on the race for the championship is another.
I don't think anyone's talking about a casino investment to get to the championship ever. I don't think that's even a recognisable thing to me. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
I think that comes down to the management, I don't mean Johnny, I mean the management of the board and the PLC. Ultimately, that's the protection that we have being a fan-owned club. If we, the DTB, get reckless and start recommending all sorts of random things that the members don't like or would ruin the club, you vote us out. If the PLC board members, who aren't the three who are from the DTB, if they start recommending things that are far too risky, are going to imperil the club with no case to back it up, then we, the DTB, get rid of them through our right to appoint board members, with absolutely no indication that any member of staff has ever done this, or current member of staff is proposing this. But if a member of staff in the future proposed something that was so significantly risky, then we have that management over them, or the PLC has the management over them to be able to stop that happening. So that's the benefit of having a fan-owned club, is that we can stop casino investment in a way that the likes of, I'm looking at Kev here because he's the expert, but the likes of Derby County and Reading and far, far too many clubs have risked everything for the chance of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
It's just, yeah, in the end, it's sort of I suppose, because we traditionally look at privately owned clubs with a single owner like we used to have. They might have directors around them, but they don't tend to have much power. Our examples are few when it comes to the kind of model we've got, which has got a whole series of checks and balances. And then when it comes, Sean's point is a good one, because the temptation is always there in football to just take that risk, too many. But I like to think that because, I think we've got a much stronger environment financially coming down the road through the regulator for a start. That's definitely going to have an impact. I think in our peer group, although it's much reduced in terms of other fan-owned clubs, we've got I'd like to think a growing relationship with Exeter. We certainly talk to them a bit. And I think they've laid out, I kind of think they've almost I think they've surpassed us in the way that they've set out what they do and developed what they do. And I was pointing Michelle to their acquisition of the lease on their training ground. The trust lent the club £100,000 to purchase the lease. And they have managed to carry out a mixture of off-pitch and on-pitch development, of growth, which is really thoughtful and in a difficult place to do it. Exeter's much tougher to work in football terms than this part of London, especially with all the kind of blessings we have of being this very distinct football club. But they've done it really, really well and very thoughtfully. And the bit that encourages me about how we've been thinking about this stuff is Graham's levers thing and the consistent discussion about investment in these areas and not constantly talk. I suppose the problem with having a strategy and saying that part of that is about where we reach, how we do on the pitch, that's what people focus on. It's understandable, but this isn't about getting to the championship. It's not shit or bust, whatever the term is. This is about having an aim on the pitch, because if we don't, we won't attract the quality of management and coaching staff. They won't be able to attract the quality of players. We won't be able to build out, because in the end, part of what makes us attractive is this relentless drive that we have in the football club, which is pretty distinct. I don't think we always realise that, quite how distinct it is within the fan base, within the football club. So this sort of, the sorts of things we're doing it's really important that we start to, we root ourselves strongly, but we retain that entrepreneurialism and that kind of really desire to forge ahead all the time, but that we sometimes tether that and we give ourselves protection. And so, Sean's point, I think it's always important we come back and remind ourselves, like Peter talking about losing the ground, we have to remember that, thinking the unthinkable, like David was talking about. If we don't remember that stuff, if it's not woven into everything we do, we make bad decisions in future. But we also have to balance the risk, and that, I think, is what we're trying to do here, and not go down the road of casino economics, but look at everything across the board in a structured way with a model that is actually incredibly robust, certainly in my experience.
And just to add, I think that I can speak for the whole PLC board here. Raising a one-off sum of money, which is what, if we sold the equity, what it would be, to throw that into a rush for promotion would be so foolhardy. It is a one-off chunk of money. It should be used for one-off items like the debt or capital spend that will generate an improvement in our P&L year on year, whether it's through higher revenues or lower interest costs. To raise 10 million of equity and just go, let's get to the championship and chuck it in there, well, we wouldn't be able to repeat it. The playing budget must come from year-on-year revenue or profits. That's the only way we can be genuinely financially sustainable, and it's really hard. And the way we are doing it right now is through the amazing work of our academy and our recruitment teams in generating player sales. But we are exceptional in that regard. There are not many other clubs like us at our level generating the sort of sums we are doing. And certainly from a bank's perspective, they would not count any of those player sales if we were to go for a bank loan, because they're one-offs and we don't know. So, it's all about regular income should fund regular costs like the playing budget. One-offs should fund one-offs. And I think the PLC board have talked about this so many times, that is the way we operate and will continue to operate, and any other way is completely foolhardy. So this gambling, it's gambling. Effectively, it's gambling to try and get promotion, and that's not the way we operate. We can't do that. We just can't afford to.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle. Right, so let's take a break for 10 minutes. Charge up your glasses, have a rest break, and then we'll come back and take, there's a whole bunch of questions from online, so we'll do those, and then we'll try and move on with the meeting. We've got a bunch of questions online, so we'll take a group of questions online, then we'll come back into the room, and then another group of questions online, and we'll keep doing that until everyone's happy that we've done enough questions, and then we'll move on.
First question we'll start with online, Matthew Hornsby. In the recent special meeting, the one thing everyone could agree on is the current constitution is completely inadequate. With this in mind, how can the board assure members that all safeguards are in place and no loopholes exist that will put fan ownership model or the wider club at risk from a hostile takeover, or otherwise if we switch to 50+1?
So I think the restricted actions in the Constitution are sound and solid, and I think everyone is in agreement with that. We have a very robust set of rules around our restricted actions, which are our safeguards. Actually, George, you could probably talk about the Constitution Working Group, and I was just talking to Tim about it. It sounds like, I'm not a member of that, but it sounds like loads of progress is being made with some, kind of key people in this room as well, with previous history on the board. So that, kind of hopefully we can modernise what were our rules around voting and meetings and bits like that, but those don't touch the robust safeguards that we've got in place.
Yeah, just the Constitution Working Group, just to give everyone an update on it, we have met several times now. A lot of people in this room are in that, and I think we're making really good progress on a lot of the issues that have been raised recently, including by members that led to those sort of members' resolutions. I don't think we're going to be ready to present it at the AGM, but by the spring SGM it should be in its finished form, ready to be voted on, and hopefully we'll have a consultation in the new year on it as well. But it's a really positive piece of work that I'm really excited about. The next question from online was Peter Bowles. He says he thinks it's unhelpful when making rules to spend time considering who owns shares at the moment. We need to make rules according to our principles.
Is that a question or a statement?
I get a feeling it's more of a statement. Ian Harrison says, with the dawn of the new football regulations regime likely to lead to more money flowing into the lower leagues, and given much of the rhetoric around selling huge amounts of equity is in respect of bond repayments, is it not better to see where we stand financially once this shakes out before reducing fan influence within our club now? I was going to say
sounds like a Kev question.
Yeah, Kev, thanks.
I mean, in terms of Alex is quite good on the pace of the bill, but because it's been reintroduced with some amendments by the Labour government, as they promised they would. I'm doing some other work on that anyway, but in my own business. But I don't think it's wise to wait for that, because within the industry, depending on who you talk to, there are some very pessimistic voices about whether it will ever get to the statute books because of the tremendous economic, financial, political power of the top clubs. But even if that wasn't true, bills don't just kind of happen really quickly, even government bills, and especially a government that's got, regardless of your political hue, that's got this many issues to deal with. It's got a huge number of issues on its plate, and it has put this up as a priority. But it was a priority of the last government, and we exited their reign without it having been passed, or even really getting past the fundamental stages. So I think you can chuck some more in there, Alex. But
I'm not as pessimistic as Kev may have appeared. Yeah, fair. I believe this bill will pass. I believe it is I believe that the version that the previous government introduced was a good start. I believe that the version that has been introduced now is much better, much stronger. As some people may know, one of my best friends in football is Niall Cooper, who has founded Fair Game and banged on about it endlessly for goodness knows how long. He's a lot more positive about what this can do than I think we should be. Not because I doubt him, but because I think we need to be pessimistic. The Eric Samuelson method of budgeting, which is always, we'll be drawn away and go out in the first round of every cup game type thing. We can't assume we're going to get a lot of money out of this, but if it does pass, as it is written at the moment, I think it will do good things for us as a club because we are well run and because we are in League Two. If we get some amendments that we are working on at the moment passed, I think it could be even better. But let's assume for the moment that however much we try, we don't get those passed. I still think it's good news. It will introduce a football regulator. It will look at parachute payments and where's that money going to go. If it's not going into parachute payments, the aim is to get it into the lower reaches of football, of the football pyramid. It's still talking about effectively the top 5 divisions, with virtually nothing for Conference North and South or below. Personally, I think that's a mistake, but so be it. But you know, this could well mean a shake-up in how football finances work, and that can only be to our benefit. So I think we as a club, we as a trust, we as individual fans need to be working strongly to get this bill not just passed but amended in the right way. We need to resist the pressure that's mainly coming from the Premier League clubs, and we need to make sure that it is enacted and comes into force as quickly as possible. You may have seen that the advert for the chair of the new Football Regulation Authority has gone live. If you know somebody who might be a favourable person who could do the job well, then that would be great as well. But let's look at this as a good thing, because I think that we only stand to gain quite a lot from it. We shouldn't dismiss it as being just another bit of politics. This is politics that actually matters to us here in Plough Lane.
Thanks, Alex. Next online.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions, so I'm going to sort of group them together and paraphrase some of them. They basically want to know why we've decided on 50.01 rather than any other number, say 60% or something.
Shall I take that? That was the advice of our secretary and legal advice. There's no difference in the protections once you go under 75 plus 1%, the special resolutions we've talked about earlier, but the majority is really, really important for us to hold and has to be sacrosanct. So that's the number that gives us the majority. It's more secure, or not more secure, it's a bigger number of shares than, let me just say that again to be really clear, it's a bigger number of shares than saying 50 plus 1 share. So 50.001 there's a lot more shares difference there. But the most important thing and why that has been chosen is for us to make sure we have the majority. We could go down to 60%, we could go down to, there's actually no legal difference between those numbers. So that's why we chose this number.
I was talking to somebody in the break, I hope you don't mind me pointing out the gentleman in the back, who I think raised a very good point, which is that it sounds risky. 50.01% sounds risky. We would only have to lose, it's not just 1 or 2 shares as James has just explained, but we'd only have to lose that tiny amount more and we'd be in the minority. The difference is, and I think this is a matter of language, the difference is that 50.01 would be held in its entirety by the Dons Trust. It's not a coalition, it's not trying to bring people together in order to combine a vote to have that majority. It is an inbuilt majority. So maybe we got our language wrong. We were talking in legal terms, which is the 50.01, whereas actually what we've branded this as is majority rules, and that's the key, is it is a majority that cannot be outvoted. And unless we go through this whole process again, and I don't think there's anybody on this board, and I don't think from looking around that there's anybody in this room who would want to see the Dons Trust going to a minority of shares. Unless we went through that process, we could never be outvoted.
And just to add to that, and then there's some questions in the room I can see as well. Just to remind everyone, at the moment we only have permission to sell 6% of equity. So once this vote passes, that's our floor. At every stage we want to sell equity, we will go to members to ask for permission to sell equity. So, and Graham said it really eloquently in the past, and others have as well. It's about providing the trust with options. So it's about the options. So no one is suggesting we're going to sell the equity to get us to 50,001 tomorrow, or even this year, or at any point in the near future. What we're suggesting is the options to go down. Maybe we go down. Maybe we find someone who wants to buy 10% or 12%, and then we go to members and say, "Can we issue these shares, please?" So that's the, kind of no one saying we're going to go down to that 50,001 instantly. And I think if you look around on the board, and including myself, no one wants us to go down to that level. And we can also buy back more shares in the future. So if our financial kind of prospects look, and we've got more money, we can buy some of that equity back as well.
Thanks, James. I think we'll take some questions in the room now. There's a question from the floor. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm a new member, a relatively new member, but I've been following along, and it seems like we're being asked to reduce the ownership with the risks that come with that, to effectively pay off some debt, which is some friendly debt on our own terms. And then we're doing this without a published strategy. And also, the timing of this seems odd to me. If the strategy is to get into the Championship, surely we should be looking at this once we're in League One, and the gap between the teams in financing is obviously larger and more difficult, because we'd obviously raise more if we're, valued more as a club in League One than we are in League Two. So it just all seems to be you're putting the cart before the horse. And I don't understand why this is being pushed for when we're making the debt payments, and we're doing well. We've added thousands of new fans coming regularly to the club. We've raised 100 and something thousand pounds recently for the pitch flooding in a week or two. We've raised several £1 million to build the club. £1.5 million of the debt has been rolled over successfully this time round. So every single stage of this seems to be you're putting the cart before the horse, because you want the opportunity to invest now, and it just makes no sense to me.
So just to be clear, there is from my point of view, financially, there is a reason why we want to do this now, because as I described earlier, we've got 3.3 million of bonds due to be repaid in 2027, which sounds a long way away, but it isn't. And whilst we have enough money to repay the bondholders next year, that is going to severely eat into our bank balances. So by June next year, we will have very little in the bank as a result. And then we will be looking into spring, so that's June 26 next year, almost nothing in the bank, and then 3.3 million to repay in spring 27. So there's not much time in between to find that money. Obviously, so people say, well, why haven't we explored this or this or this? We absolutely are exploring every option that we can think of. The most obvious answer for me, the quick fix to solve that problem, is another great couple of deals on player sales, or we have a great cup run. But there are no guarantees on that. So as we've talked about, this is about levers available to us if we need to use them, and we don't have 2 or 3 15% shareholders sitting outside waiting to sign their documents as soon as you all agree. That's not the case. We want to plan ahead, and it's because we care about being financially sustainable that we are bringing this now, so that we have time to plan, to look at how we're doing next year. If we're really tight, then we're going to go and try and sell some equity, but in a planned way, where we look for the right sort of investors, and then we bring those investors to you as members to be introduced to you, so that you can get comfortable about their background, who they are, why they're doing it, what they're looking for, etc., before we issue the shares. But that all takes quite a long time. It's not a quick fix, and as I say, from my point of view, 2027 is very soon around the corner, and that's why we're doing this now.
Just to quickly add is that, and going back to the Exeter example again, the reason they're in the position they're in, and they are a really good example for us, is because they have planned relentlessly and thought these things through well in advance. They had an aberration when Paul Tidsdale's contract was effectively torn up by the membership, about 95 people, called an SGM, and it caused a bit of a schism for a period. And they sat back and they thought pragmatically about what they wanted to achieve, how they wanted to do it, the manner structurally in which they wanted to do it, and they put a model in place. And the only reason that they now bat in the top half of League One is because when they were in League Two and they sat down and worked this out, they did it honestly and they went through everything. And they went everything line by, and they thought about what their ambition was going to be, because that's the other thing is, you know, the assumption that we all want to be, you know, in the Championship, for example. Well, you know, there are some people who say, well, you know, I'd rather keep 100% of the club under fan. I'd rather have 75% plus one of the shares and stay in League Two. Lots of younger fans certainly say, well, we want a bit of what you got. You know, I'm in my 50s. Lots of us had the joy of the things we had when we played in the top flight. And we've got to try to balance that. That's the difficult element then. And actually within an industry that isn't used to thinking strategically, these conversations don't go on at most clubs. They have to go on at fan-owned clubs for obvious reasons. So, you know, in the end, what we're trying to do is steer a way through, not a middle path, because that's not how compromise works. Sometimes we have to give up more than we might want to. But this whole process is about trying to steer a path through all of that and doing it in well in advance of the challenges. Because if you want to get to the Championship, League One's one of your stops on the destination, on the way. So we have to be having these thoughts now, which is why people like Michelle and Graham, etc., reminding us relentlessly that these deadlines are not that far away is very important, even if occasionally I find it a bit annoying. It's incredibly important, and they're right to do it.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think my issue is that you're saying the strategy is to get into the Championship, but selling the equity now would be worth less than if we were in League One. So how do you then take the next step when you're in League One? But it sounds like it actually is just to pay down the debt.
It's part of the process is to ensure that we're managing the debt. So if you want to get to the League One or the potential Championship status, you're going to have a lower level of debt, because we can't rely on the old player sales thing. In the end, we might be, you know, I've got a feeling we could be quite lucky in that respect, because we've got a damn good academy and a really good production line. However, we know that we can't rely on that for income, so we have to think, how are we going to manage the debt? You know, if we're going to get to the point that we want to get to, if we want to be successful, regardless of what level we want to play, if we want to be successful as a football club, we are going to have to manage the debt. That's just a fact. We can't default on it, because that will destroy our reputation for prudence that was begun in 2002, which every board since has tended very carefully. You know, we got a loan from Barclays, an overdraft from Barclays, where no one in football was getting anything. We got, I think it was 900,000, I think. You know, we have done so much, and this has to be part of the journey to being successful on the pitch and building the business out. We have to manage the debt, and that has to be through as many levers as possible. Like I said, we are really not. We are a bit exceptional in that we think these things through a huge amount. So, you know, and I thank you for what you're saying, because it's important that we're interrogating.
Yeah, the only thing I don't understand is, if we want to progress, we sell now, we can't sell tomorrow. So how did your strategy make sense in that regard then?
You've reduced your overheads by paying down debt. You're reducing interest payments.
But I mean, long term, for us to get into the Championship, we're going to have to take on more debt, aren't we?
Well, no, not necessarily. No, that's not what.
How would we progress?
Because you're growing the business. Because you're growing the business. Because you're not standing still. If you're paying off debt and you're reducing your overheads, you're increasing the income, you're increasing opportunity to earn income to bring into the business in order to then step up a bit further. That's the point of reducing debt.
Clubs in the Championship are, you know,
at the moment,
hundreds of millions of pounds.
And that's why we're not going that route.
£10 million here. I just don't understand.
No, and that's why we're not going down the route of spending it on player wages.
And
We're talking about spending the business.
Can I just jump in for a second? Sorry.
Yeah.
A key part of that vision is for us to get to the Championship as a sustainable fan-owned club. If that's not achievable, then we can't do it. So, you know, kind of, there's no one suggesting just piling on debt to try and get to the Championship. So the sustainable aspect of that is a really good challenge and is really important.
I'm not against going down to 50.1% in the long term, but I'm saying if you do it now, you've effectively done it. You can't do it later down the line unless you buy back the debt, the equity, which would obviously cost us more down the line.
Yeah, and I think you know, kind of everyone on the board and the finance committee is in agreement with you. It's about selling whatever equity we want to sell, we can sell, is available to sell, and we have buyers for at the right time. This vote isn't about the time in which we execute that sale. This vote is about allowing the trust to have that new floor so that we can then go out and find people. It may be that the right time to sell is very soon to sell a chunk of equity to get us to pay off those bond debts that we've got coming down the line, or it may be actually, as Michelle says, we get some academy gems, we find another alley or whatever, and we don't need to do that now. And in 5 years' time, when we're in a higher league and we've built out Plough Lane a bit more or whatever, you know, that might be the right time to sell. So I hate the word, and I'm going to say it's about optionality. Is the, you know, kind of, forgive me, and this vote is about providing those options. So, okay, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. I'll take that.
And just to say, sorry, James, that we have, and Edward Leake is in the room. I'm going to embarrass him now. Edward is the master of our share capital table, who does all sorts of manoeuvring around to see what's possible and what isn't. And one of the things that we have absolutely looked at is the most recent share price the right share price, and should it be higher? And how much extra could we get at different share prices? And you're absolutely right. We are going to get promoted this year, aren't we? So next year, we can sell at a much higher unit price because we're in League One. So we will. We're not, you know, as I said, we're not going to go today and sell at a rubbish price to rubbish people. We are going to be careful, and we're going to come to you before that actual sale takes place. And we'll hopefully do it at the right time, only when we really, really need to, rather than, oh, we just feel like doing this, so let's do it.
I've got to try and move us on, because we've got, I think, a dozen or more questions online, and there's people in the room as well, so let's do that. Jane? Sorry, we'll come to you next.
Jane, you've got to
Yes, I'll come to you as well, thank you.
Hello, right. Thank you very much. Just to say, I think it's a really interesting meeting this evening with lots of straight answers or straight questions. I'm not sure we're getting particularly straight answers, because I'm not sure there are straight answers to give. Just on resolution 1, super restricted actions, I think it's really important that we have protections, and that's one of the things that worries me about going below 75%, is because we lose the protections that are in company law. And the person who asked why not 60%, James, you're dead right. There's absolutely no difference in the protections between 75 and 50.01, so it's not a question of a scale in between. That's where the protections are. And it's not just restricted actions, it's about the increase rights that people with 25%, and whilst we've put a step in that says you can only hold 15%, that we've already heard several times that people can work together to get 25%, and that's where they get increased rights against a majority owner that doesn't have 75%. It's really complex, and I think there is still some more work to do in the Q&A to make that really, really clear what those increased rights are, just so people are aware of the risks. Just a point that Kev made earlier on about the unexpected. Let's not all forget we had COVID 2020. This club, I was on the board at the time, struggled massively. Thank God for debentures. And I think we just need to be really clear. We talked a lot about the strategy. We haven't seen the strategy. You're all in a privileged position. You've all seen it. None of us have seen it, and you're asking us to vote on something that we haven't seen, because the strategy underpins how this all works. We've been told that that will be very, very soon, and soon tonight. When will we get that? Tomorrow, before the voting opens? Because that's really important to understand how this club is going to grow with or without this equity money. Super restricted actions, the numbers in here are quite scary. I completely agree with the protections that we need. I'm interested to know how we got to the numbers of at least 90% of total eligible membership, at least 90% of the votes so cast, and at least 80% of the total membership on vote 1, and the second one to be 90%, and again 90% eligible to vote. If we had had those in place when we were selling Kings Meadow, we wouldn't have sold Kings Meadow. That is a huge, huge ask, and I think whilst it comes across as being a really positive thing to have the protections, we might have set that too high that you would never be able to do it, and we don't know when, if we suddenly want to build an 80,000 seat stadium, we would not be able to sell that on these figures. And I just think we need to be really careful about setting ourselves up if we're not able to reach those. But, and you know, at the moment I know you don't like the term, we've gifted membership, we've given season ticket holders membership. There's a number of them that aren't engaged. I think we've got 100 and something odd people online and 38 in the room. It's a massive job to get that turnout, particularly for something that you might want to do in future. I think there is relevance in the football governance bill. I think what Alex has said is really interesting. Parachute payments are in it, and it's a second reading stage, so actually it is progressing, and I think it does interact with this when we're talking about money. When does voting actually open on this? I know it's a poll and it will be after, but when does it actually open?
I'm going to come on and talk about that in a minute when I declare it, but after the meeting, so
okay.
Not immediately, but as soon as we can.
Imminently, right, okay. Sorry, I made a load of notes as people were talking. And then I think the timing of the bonds that the gentleman mentioned earlier, I think that has been quite critical. And Michelle knows this, and I'm quite happy to be quite open about it. I've asked to take my bond money out because I wanted to know the outcome of this before and was told that wasn't possible. So I'm slightly disappointed that I could have just failed to engage in the process and kept the bond money with you guys for longer if depending on the outcome of this vote would depend whether I put the money back in or not. So I think it does interact, and I think you've done really well to get as many people to say that they would reinvest. I think you would have got more people to reinvest had the timings been different of the two things.
Yeah, so Jane, just to be clear on that last point, what I've said to anybody in this situation who is concerned about this vote passing is the club needs to know the worst case scenario of how much it needs to repay so that we can plan for cash flow wise. However, if the vote does, so it would be helpful for us to know what your decision is, worst case. So if you're someone who doesn't believe in going below 75% and therefore says, I'm not happy with this, I want my money back, then that's the decision, so like Jane's done. However, if the vote doesn't pass, I've said to any of those individuals, they can change their minds. I don't want to leave it late because I've got over 1,000 bonds and all the admin to go with that. There's a lot of work, but I'd rather people say they want their money back and then, in December when we'll know, coming to me and saying, actually, you know what, you can keep my money for another 5 years. And I'm happy to manage that.
Sean McLaughlin, I would like to ask the question I had to ask rather than pointing out where I thought the answers to other questions should have been. Thank you for the June 24 update, Michelle, on the finances. Can I ask one question to start with? The results that are given in the table, are these the 2023 results or 2024? Because the document reads as if it's 24, but the figures look very close to 23, which would imply that we were pretty stable on revenues and operating profit. But whilst you're looking at that...
I'm not sure, can I just check which, are you talking about the September
No,
finance update?
there were no financial results in the September update. It was the June 2024 AFC Wimbledon finance report.
Okay.
And whilst you're looking at that, my question relates to player sales. And I know it's been stated quite a few times that you can't rely on those. Sam Mann built a football club to what he did, relying on player sales, because he put no money in. He worked out how much he'd lost and he sold a player every single year. And we are building up quite a good track record. Now, we've seen the reliance on the 23 accounts on player registration sales. We know we've had some very good money in 23-24, and I think it would have been useful to have an update on that, because obviously the results must be done, they're being audited, but also we've also had some significant money this year. We've had the sale from Jack Curry. I know we've received a significant, well, we should have received a significant amount of money for Michael Golding, who went from, I think, Chelsea to Wolves, because we did a sale when I was on the board, Jane was on the board, 12, 14 years ago, with a very significant payment. So there's people that understand a bit about the finances, know there's still significant income streams coming in. All we're getting is bad news. This is what we lost last year, bar the player sales. You can't rely on them, you can't rely on them. A proper update, maybe for the full year, giving us the details of player sales, plus the first 3 months, would allow people to make a much more considered decision as to whether at this point we'd want to vote for reducing the shareholding. And just one final point, because Jane is right, there's nothing between 75 and 50, but it does make maybe 30% getting together a lot easier if the Dons Trust only owns 50% as opposed to 60. So there are some implications and nuances between a 60 and a 50 from that perspective.
I'll just very quickly, before we go to Michelle, the transfer fee thing. The problem with the transfer market is that you're talking about what Sam Imam did in Yay way back then. That was when the transfer market was a different beast. It's changed. It was, when it started, it was pre-Bosman, then we had Bosman. Recently, we've had another ruling, which isn't going to overhaul the transfer market in the way some of the scare stories were suggesting, but it's got, there could be some changes there. There will be some changes, there has to be. That sort of thing continues to happen, and it's particularly important to note that very often it's affected by things that we no longer have any control over as a country, because they tend to be things that are settled at European Union, European Commission level, because European law informs a lot of the financial practice of UEFA, because that's how regulation is developed, because they are the strongest body in Europe, a political body in Europe, the European Commission. So the idea that we would even consider becoming reliant in any way, shape or form in finances is on transfers is for the birds, I'm afraid. The idea that we get bonuses, brilliant, and the idea that that allows us to shove some money into debt, or increase the playing budget for a couple of years or something like that, or pay a little bit of extra to get a loan player in, I'm all for that. But if you start to build a model around a transfer market that in the last 2 weeks has been demonstrated actually isn't currently fit for purpose, would be insanity.
Kevin, just one point. I wasn't saying we should rely on it. I was pointing out that I know we've had substantial player registration income in the last financial year, which we haven't had the details for, and in for the 3 months to 3rd September. That must impact the cash flows, which I think were outlined in June. It would be useful to have the full details and information before we make a decision. I wasn't suggesting that we rely on it going forward, although if I was a betting man, I would suggest we will continue to get some reasonable income, because I know we've got a number of contracts still outstanding for which we expect to get some money. Oh, and also we got some money for Jack Rodani, I assume, for the onward sale from Huddersfield to, I've forgotten where he went, but Coventry. So there's another collection there. I'm just saying there's a lot of income that's coming in that we're not being told about, but we're being asked to make a decision based on, you know, the story that we can't cover our budget and we've got this impending doom.
So,
that's what I'm saying. Not reliance, but let's have the full facts before we make a decision.
Well, I can't give you the full facts on the accounts because they're still being audited. This year's PLC accounts will be published for the AGM. But I can tell you on rough numbers, our turnover's gone up significantly. That's excluding player sales, so it's the revenue from match day, commercial, sponsorship, etc. But our costs have gone up at a much faster rate, and that reflects the high inflation environment that we've been operating in. This stadium is really expensive to run, even though we have I would say, a very lean staff team. We do not overspend on staff costs, which, you know, means it's very hard for some of the staff team to do their jobs properly. But despite having higher player sales this year than last year, so we had 2.6 million of player sales last year, and we've got over 3 million this year. We've got a lower profit this year than last year.
To be clear, in the report where it says the average loss for League Two clubs in the 2023-24 season, 2 million, and then has a table, are those the 23 or 24 figures?
They'll be the 23 figures.
Okay, I assumed that they were 24 based on the title.
No, because nobody's been audited yet. So.
I thought you're giving us provisional figures, which you can do. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Right, we've got
so it's a tough environment, basically.
Two people in red who want to ask a question. Lady at the front and the gentleman at the back. So. Promise you'll be next.
Question I wanted to ask was the bonds. There's obviously you're talking about next year and the following year. Obviously bonds maturing. Have you considered? Because I've got friends who've got bonds. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get bonds, but I've got friends who've got bonds and that, and a lot of them are interested in. Obviously extending and that, but I mean obviously you talk about interest rates and all the rest of it, but interest rates are negotiable because interest rates change all the time. So obviously it's something that you should be looking at as something to save your expenditure over the next couple of years.
Could you just say your name, please? Thanks.
Sorry, it's Alex Fisher.
Yeah, and we are absolutely. So we were standing ready this year to open up the bond to a Plough Lane Bond 3 if the amount that people wanted to be repaid next spring was too high. But as I say, we're well within the budget for next year, but I think it's highly likely that we'll need to open up the bond to new money either the second half of next year. So, and as I say, I'm hopeful. Obviously, interest rates generally are going down, but I think it's highly unlikely we'll persuade people who wanted 6% to go below that. So I would expect that we'll probably end up with 6% on average for any of those bonds that are rolled over, or any new money.
But next year, obviously, if interest rates continue to go down, if they decide to pull their money out, would they be able to get a better interest anywhere else? I doubt they would.
Well, I think the point is that, you know, we have to remember you're not putting your money into a savings account that's got a protection from the government under the financial services rules. You are lending to a football club, and it's highly risky. You know, there is, and within the rules of the bonds, if we can't repay, then we don't repay. You've got no guarantee that you'll definitely get your money back, other than me standing there saying, under no circumstances are we going to not honour any debts when they fall due.
No, that's understandable, and I think most people who took these bonds out understood that,
Yeah.
but they know what they're investing in is something that they truly, truly love, and are willing to take the opportunity. And if, say, for instance, like it's coming up for renegotiation, and the points you're offering is maybe 4.5, 5 instead of 6, and they can't do better elsewhere, they're going to think, well, why would I move it?
Yeah, so
Because let's face it, we as fans we trust you, and we trust the club, and everything about that goes on here to do the right thing, and you've shown in the past, on the majority of the time, you're pretty good at doing that.
Yeah. So I think that to me, I see a real difference between the bonds that were issued in 2020 at a time of absolute peril, where we were not able to finish the stadium without issuing those bonds, or we would have given the control of our club to 3 other people. And so at that point, we were in a crisis, and there were an awful lot of fans who really just wanted to help the club, and they really weren't that, if you think it's £1,000 bond, 1 or 2% interest, it's 10 quid a year. You really don't care about whether you get that or not, to be honest. But then you roll forward 2 years further on, and we were offering up to 6%, and 6% is what people wanted, because that second group of people were not the die-hard fans. They were more interested in a commercial return. Now, I may be proved wrong, and I may be delighted that in 2027, those people turn around and go, you know what, I wanted 6% before, but I'll go with 4 now. But I can't work on that basis, because the evidence says to me that that group of people wanted a higher interest rate. So they weren't just die-hard fans. They were people around who'd heard about the bond and were interested, liked our story, but they also wanted a higher return.
Yeah, but there's nothing to say that you can sort of say to him, look, in 2 years' time, this is when you mature, this is the interest rate we'll be looking at offering
Absolutely.
you, and that would you still be interested?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a trade-off, isn't it? It's a trade-off between getting as many people to roll over as possible for another 5 years, and that may mean we have to give them a higher interest rate, or having to repay them in full.
Absolutely. I know you obviously got balance for Peter and Paul either way. Keep the scales fairly evenly balanced, and that. But I know there's probably people, and myself, I wasn't able to do it. But if you offered a bond in the next 18 months and that, I would be interested, because I've actually got some money now.
Yeah. I mean, well done.
Congratulations.
The other thing, just for reference, that on my list to do is to contact all of the bondholders who had either 10 or 20-year bonds, and ask them if they would like to swap for equity or donate their bonds. So obviously they're so far out that no one's going to be able to decide what interest rate they want in 10 years' time or 20 years' time, but there may well be people in that group who were just happy to give us some money, not really expecting it back, and if they can donate or swap for equity now, that helps us already. So that's next on the list to do.
It's good to know that you're looking ahead to it on that.
Thanks, Michelle. The lady in the front has been very, very patient. Could you just say your name as well, please?
Terry Langford. I just would like to acknowledge and thank the board for having taken the opinion in the room at the last SGM about poll voting, and to appreciate that. I want to really support this gentleman about the timing of this. I just get the feeling that it's very short-termism that we're trying here with repaying the bond, and looking at training ground, looking at the third floor. So where exactly, if we go down to 50.1, are we going to get any money from to develop the rest of the ground? Could someone please answer me that question?
So I think realistically, the development committee, and they are already doing it, would be looking to find partners who are interested in the whole development around the stadium, not just the stadium. So, you know, there's a lot of retail business park type things going on around here, but as more and more housing comes along, there are opportunities for things better than business parks. And so we're having conversations with developers who are looking at the whole thing. So helping us grow a stadium might be part of a bigger deal for more housing or more retail units, etc., etc. So it's highly unlikely we would be able to finance building out the stadium ourselves. Interestingly, when we had the flood, one of the guys, Joe Giordano, who Ivor will remember, was very heavily involved in the stadium build. He said to us, actually, you know what? A simple fix, which would be much cheaper, would be to increase the slope of the stands in the south, east and north, so make them steeper, similar to the west stand, and you could add a few more rows along the top, and that would be, because of the way they were built, it would be relatively cheaper to do than completely rebuilding a stand to look like the west. So that's another thing that we're looking at. But yeah, we wouldn't be able to. So the equity is highly unlikely to fund the development of the stadium.
I mean, it just seems to me that you've just got these things that, well, okay, we haven't seen the strategy, that the equity is going to do this, this and this, and then where do we go?
Yeah, so it's like how did we build this stadium? We did it in conjunction with parties who built the housing around. So it's that sort of thing.
Thank you.
The other thing worth saying on this is that we are a community asset in this local area. We are seen by Merton Council and indeed by the other councils around here as being a good thing. To that extent, and without prejudicing whatever any developer or potential partner might come forward with in the future. But if somebody wanted to build some houses nearby and said to the council, as part of this development, we will also fund something that is beneficial to us within this stadium that increases our revenue in the future, then that would be a planning gain that the council might look favourably on. I don't want to suggest that we should be reliant on that, but it is something that we are in a fortunate position now, not just because we're a football club, but also because we're a community asset. We've got this space, we've got various other spaces. The work that we do in the community through the foundation, through DLAG, through all that sort of thing, that investment of time and a bit of money, but that investment puts us in a position where if a developer comes along and wants to do something wholly unconnected to football, if they chuck something in that benefits us, that might also help to get them their planning permission. So it is potentially, I put it no stronger than that, but potentially a route forward for the sort of things that we couldn't possibly afford just through the equity.
We've got about a dozen questions online, so Ivor quickly, and then we'll go on to those.
Okay, I'm just making an observation here more than a question. To me, this is the most important meeting that I think I've ever been to for the club and the trust. I gave up fantastic concert tickets to come here tonight. I'm absolutely dismayed at the turnout. I can't believe it for such an important issue. There's 133 people on loan, online even. Would be good if we got all those on loan players in like that. But yeah, what have we got in here? 38, 40 people, a full board more or less. Well done for turning out. I can't believe it. You need to get to a threshold of about 3,800 in favour. I mean, it is unbelievable to me that more aren't here. I don't know how you intend to do it. I don't know what you've got up your sleeve. I've been asked many times how people should vote on this, and I said, if you're in favour of it, you must vote in favour. If you're not in favour of it, for me, don't vote, because I can't see how you can possibly get to the threshold. I'm gobsmacked that our membership hasn't been more engaged with this and turned out. Maybe it's because they haven't got the strategy yet or something like that. But you know, this is the biggest decision that we've had to make since a long time ago. And I'm just amazed. There we are.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you raise, Ivor, but I think what I would say is we are going to be conducting the vote online after the meeting, which is a little bit different to how we've done things in the past. So there is a period of time where we want to try to engage our members to make sure that they consider the questions and vote on them. Let's take the online questions then, shall we?
I'm going to group a couple of them to get through them as quickly as we can. So we've had a lot of questions about the type of person can invest. They want to know, do we have a profile of the type of investor we're looking for, and who decides what that profile is?
So there's a document in the papers that kind of outlines the investor approval process, which is quite useful for that, I think. We've talked about stewardship equity, which, you know, kind of, and Graham's talked eloquently about that, and, you know, kind of Nick being a really good model for that. And, you know, kind of I know from brief conversations and from the recommendations that you know, kind of Nick wants to find other people like him as well that can come in and invest in a similar way to he has. So there's no profile in mind. I think you know, and I just, once again, at the risk of repeating myself, but I think it's really, really important, is that in terms of that profile, any significant investors will come to, you know, and we can't issue any more shares than the 6% we have without coming to members. So members will have a chance to approve that investor or that investment when we issue those shares. So I think that, you know, in terms of that profile, there's no set profile that we are looking for. If this vote passes, we then have an opportunity to start shaping that and start, you know, we've got an opportunity to kind of go to market, as it were, with the permission to sell up to 15% if that's what we want to do. So we can then start to, you know, really focus down on what that profile looks like and how we attract those people.
Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Next group of questions is talking about revenue generation schemes and how can we better improve the day-to-day funding of the club post this scheme to either improve the planned budget or improve other sort of necessary expenditure.
Just say that question again, George, sorry.
Sorry, it was talking about revenue schemes and how we can raise more money on the day-to-day operations of the club to help boost the planned budget so we're not relying on player sales.
Well, so I think, you know, as a team, you know, we brought in James Woodruff as our new MD. He's been here a while now. It's been a bit eventful. We firmly believe in his abilities and not just what he can do himself. He comes from a marketing and comms background. He's very interested in talking to people about selling our story again and what does that look like. But he's also looking at the whole staff team and looking at, a bit like we've done on the football side, where can we get that extra 1 to 5% uplift, whether that's better staff who are more experienced or, you know, improvements in infrastructure and the way we operate. So he is looking at everything connected with the stadium side of the operations. And Craig Cope is obviously focused on the same for the football. And, you know, you think about the football side, for example, you know, improving the training ground facilities, having a better gym, having a better restaurant, having somewhere for the players to hang out after training. All those things are just little things on the periphery, but they all improve the well-being and the camaraderie of the players, and so it's things like that also on the stadium side. So the contract for the catering, who Elior is the company that we use for most of our catering, apart from the pub and the South Stand food vans. Their contract is coming up for renewal next year, so we're looking at that. We're looking at, are there any other partners out there who might give us a better deal? We're looking at the kit deal to see how we can improve that. So at every level, any significant contract that we have in place, the club are looking at whether they can make them better. And then obviously sponsorship deals, etc. So, you know, the club are clear that they need to grow revenues and they need to contain costs, and that's where they are all incentivised, both sides are incentivised in a bonus structure to deliver on those things.
Next question's from Ian Harrison. He says, is there any expectation that these shareholders will put their own money into the club for future projects, or are they simply going to hold equity? If 50.01% of shareholders are regularly investing their hard-earned money into developing the club, are we anticipating the 49.99 to do the same, or is this not necessary?
So again, I'm going to quote Graham, who isn't here to correct me, but Graham says that kind of if the price of democracy is eternal vigilance, then the price of fan ownership is eternal fundraising. So I think that kind of that's the nature of our fan-owned model, is that we will always, there will always be times where we have to go to our fans to look to raise funds, whether that's for repairing a pitch, whether that's for, kind of the Wimbledon fund to inject into the playing budget. There's loads of good ideas. The Dons draw to fund the academy. There's loads of really positive opportunities and examples of that in the past. So I think the answer is yes, we will always, as fan ownership means that we will always need to go to fans to look for opportunities to invest and grow. And we'll always ask fans before doing that, obviously.
Colette says this question's for those not on the PLC board. She says, do the DTB members not on the PLC have access to regular detailed updates on finances, for example, management accounts?
Well, yes, in simple terms. Sorry, Mark Lewis. We obviously get, as those people in the audience will know that have previously been on the board, we get PLC minutes of meetings and have the opportunity, we get them in advance of the PLC meetings happening, which happen on a monthly basis, and we get the opportunity obviously to then put additional questions into the PLC should we wish to, and then we get the minutes of those discussions that have been had. And we'll get information relating to pertinent financial things such as Ali's transfer fee, for example, which obviously is commercially confidential.
The question was, does the Dons Trust board, and particularly the members that are on the PLC board, get the management accounts of the PLC?
You do.
You've not answered that, but thank you for what you're telling us you do get.
Yes,
the rest of your board members looked slightly... no one leapt to answer the question with a yes.
The answer was yes, Sean, and it's here.
The first thing I said was yes.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Michelle. The question was directed to the... You can keep nodding your head, Kevin, but it was directed to the board members who weren't on the PLC board, and the microphone seemed to have to go quite a long way down the table before someone answered it, and they didn't give a full answer.
That's why I was letting Mark speak instead, because we've been spoken.
Yeah, it went past quite a few. But so it will be in the record that you regularly receive the AFC Wimbledon PLC management accounts on a regular basis to allow you to do your stewardship duties. Thank you.
Next question is from Sean Fox. Sean Fox says, can we set out in a binding way what information trust members will be given for a Cat B resolution when it comes to selling equity? He says he is concerned that they will not be given the full information due to commercial confidentiality.
I think that's a question that I'd need the Secretary to advise on to be able to answer that. given that he's asked for it in a binding way. If I'm involved in that conversation in any way, shape or form, if I'm on the board at the time, I would want to give members as much information as we are humanly and legally able to do before making that decision. Any future investment, proving a future investor is absolutely critical and a really important decision. So if I have any involvement and I look at my board colleagues, and I think everyone would nod in agreement that we'd give as much information as we are legally absolutely possibly able to do. But in terms of like actually setting something down that's binding, I'd need, that's beyond my purview.
I think you said that well, James, I agree.
Next question's from Jeff Ricketts. Can we restate the value of the shares, please? I think he heard it at 6% equals 1.6 million. So that, and if we can, we're already halfway to the 2027 liability.
I think Michelle's already intimated that we're thinking about those things.
Thanks.
You can't say, can we?
No, sorry, the question was, what's the exact value of the equity we have available to sell at the moment? Is that right?
Yeah.
Michelle, are you able to give us a reasonable answer on that?
So, sorry, Edward's gone. He's much faster at this than me. So we have, at the moment we can go, we've got about 5% of the voting rights available for sale. If we issue new shares, that effectively becomes about 6%. So if you think about Nick Robertson's, his 10% was 2.5 million. So I think you'd probably be looking at around just under 2 million for what's available. But it would be a negotiation. We have the most recent share price at 83p a share, but it would depend on the commercial deal that we did with an investor as to what they were looking for. And what they were prepared to pay. The one thing I will say is that certainly US investors that are all over the UK football market, they've all come along and said our valuation is too high, and they don't agree with it. So we can try as much as we want to offer a higher share price. Whether someone will buy is a different matter.
Next question is from Peter Bowles. He says, do the DTB think we will ever need to pass further special resolutions? If yes, what might they be? If no, why not?
We talked about thought experiments earlier, and I feel unequipped to answer that. I feel unequipped to answer that question. I think that sorry, not to kind of laugh at the question because that's not what I'm trying to do at all. I can't. I think Peter, if you've got something in mind specifically, please ask. But I can't. I don't think anyone here can predict the future in that way.
Never say never, but nothing in mind.
Any more?
Thank you for reminding me of Donald Rumsfeld there. The known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. It's football. We don't know.
Let's move on.
Apologies. It's a reasonable question to which we just don't have an answer.
Let's move on. There's a few more questions and then we'll try and move on the meeting, if that's all right.
We'll group a couple more together. Basically, some people are asking, should going below 50.01 be a super RA?
That's a really interesting question. I can give a personal view on that, I think, which is that I don't think it should. I think that the threshold of a category A restricted action is very, very high. I think that there is a series of things that could happen in the future that we might need a break glass in case of an emergency thing, and we'd always need that break glass in case of emergency thing. We talked about kind of several steps coming down the future, and and I really don't want to consider any scenario in which that would be the case, kind of thing. And it would be, but I think we'd always need a break glass in case of emergency. And I know in our society constitution and stuff there are other options and kind of around that, but for me I don't think it needs to be a super restricted action, because the biggest risk to our fan ownership would be liquidation. So we'd always need the kind of flexibility to operate around that in a really, we're talking about really doomsday set of scenarios here.
Thanks, James.
Thanks.
Anyone else? No. Moving on.
I've got two more online ones. One of them's talking about Cedars. Peter Bowles, Cedars shareholders don't get to vote on things. To what degree is the Cedars nominee, he thinks that's the right term, in communication with the PLC? Wouldn't they be obliged to act in whatever way they think will make the Cedars PLC share value increase to stimulate their marketplace?
Yeah, I can cover that one. So yes, as part of the Cedars fundraising, because it's a crowdfunding site, they effectively have a veto on changes to the PLC articles, even though the total shareholding is 2% or whatever it is. So, why should they have that? Their argument is they are there to protect the minority shareholders, and so they wouldn't want, for example, the share structure to be completely changed so that those Cedars shareholders lost all value from their shares. We have had to ask their consent twice in the last couple of years on changes. So the big changes we did in 2022 around the governance, making sure the restricted actions were in the PLC rules as well, all that sort of stuff. And, they can't reasonably withhold their consent. So the way we've explained it to them is we believe that these changes are in the best interests of the PLC and for the better running of the PLC, and therefore please will you agree? And they have done. So, it's not ideal, but I think it's, unfortunately, we were where we are. I don't like them having that veto. I also don't like the fact that effectively anybody that bought through Cedars doesn't get a vote themselves. It's a block vote that Cedars exercises. But we were where we were at the time. I think if we did a rights issue and if we had that 6% and we couldn't find one person and we went out to our fans and said, would you buy shares for that 6%, we'd want to try and do that ourselves if we possibly could, rather than going through a crowdfunding site like Cedars, because obviously they take a big fee and you get less voting power as an individual investor. So that's one of the things we're looking at the moment.
Thanks, Michelle. We've got one last question online, then we can move on.
This is from Alan Phillips. He says the worry isn't 49%, it's 25% being reached by 3 or 4 people that may even currently have shares already. If this possible group was such minded, their influence could have ramifications, true or false.
Yeah, I think we talked about the special resolution stuff earlier, and I think there's more about that online as well. If 25% of people gather together, it means we can't pass the special resolutions that we might want to do. That's literally the answer to that.
Thank you. If there's no more questions from the room, I think I'd like to move on to item 4 to declare a poll vote on these 2 resolutions. Peter, you want to ask something before I do that?
I'd just like to make clear that any comments and criticisms I've made this evening aren't questioning necessarily the integrity or the intentions of this board. My concern is looking years, decades ahead, when the club might be in the wrong hands. And by the wrong hands, I mean the wrong structure, the wrong DTB, and the wrong PLC. That's why I want more control, more restrictions. Why I don't want us to attract investors who see a value their bank balance in the future. A lot of people here, the other point I'd make is, it's sad in a way that it's evident that certain people, or the DTB, look on people who criticise
what's happening as your enemies. We are not.
Nobody does that,
no,
Peter.
let me finish.
But we don't do that. So
I
just
have
feel I
heard
need to
that
say
phrase used of people
we don't
in this
use
room.
we don't use that language. It's not
Well,
us and them.
I've
It's not
heard it
friends and
used.
enemies.
There is a perception then that we are looked on as an opposition. We are not. We have the same, we care as passionately about that. I'd even go so far almost to say that I have one common bond with Kevin, that we both care passionately about the club. I'd almost go so far as to say that I'm disappointed that he's standing down from the board now. Perhaps because he'd be fighting me for this microphone in the future. The best thing, I think the best thing to come out of the meeting is, I hope the Dons Trust board, if any of you have been perpetrating this myth about the championship, will put a stop to it, because it's ludicrous and it's a distortion and it's misled everyone. The best thing, if people want to vote for this, they should vote for reducing debt. We've had a very detailed analysis from Michelle. That's what we should be concerned about, not the championship. And I hope whatever campaign you're about to embark on, and I'm sure there is going to be one, I've heard there's going to be leaflets, I've heard there's going to be video presentations. If you're going to go that route, then at least talk sensibly about the future. As I said earlier, and I'll end quickly, I'm not against 50+1. What I want to fight for, and I don't believe you're fighting enough for it, I don't want Sam Amam, the Bank of Sam Amam, back here. Us losing the club once was a tragedy. Losing the club again would be appalling. And I just want to stress, I believe everybody, particularly James, particularly Alex, has spoken and Michelle has spoken very eloquently tonight about the concerns. And I hope we can all work together and take this club forward.
Thank you, Peter. I think, you speak a lot of shared sentiment that we have. We're actually doing this work now to inform future boards, to get to a point where we have some clarity, not about winning or losing something, but to understand where people feel on these very nuanced issues that everyone's been able to talk about tonight in good heart, I think, and I'm really delighted about that. And so I think that's been a good outcome for tonight. I do echo your sentiment. I'm sorry Kevin is standing down. He's been a great board member, and all the people who are standing down this time around have been a great group of people to work with for the last year or so that I've been working with them. It's been an absolute privilege. One of them had to go. He waited till the last moment he could before he had to get a train to Northampton, and he won't get home till 1 a.m. or something because he did that. And that's the kind of people that we work with, and they're all fantastic people. I love working with all of them. And I thank you for your comment about us having the same shared interest in the future of our great club, and we do that. Does anyone else want to add anything to that, or shall we carry on? I think we would all love to go home soon. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my drop moment. All I was going to add to that was I appreciate I haven't personally been able to be in a couple of recent SGMs and OGMs due to work commitments, but what we're doing as a board, what we're trying to do as a board with our ongoing discussions on WhatsApp when we're not in between meetings and then obviously at meetings, is take on board the comments that are made in meetings like this from our members and learn from them about, somebody made a point earlier on about polls and so on, about how members want us to be doing things. We don't have the right answers. We don't always have the right answers, and we're certainly not trying to dictate to any of our members that we are the only ones with the answers, because any sensible board of any sensible organisation like this will only thrive if they listen to their members, and we're trying to do that. Doesn't mean we get everything right all the time, doesn't mean we get everything wrong all the time, and we're certainly not viewing anybody as any kind of enemy or whatever type of inflammatory language like that would be used, because I don't think inflammatory language like that benefits anybody from either side. So we're trying to do the best we can. Doesn't always work, but we try to do that, and obviously there are a number of people who are on this board right now, who are standing in future elections, and I hope that many other people choose to put themselves forward for election as well. I know that's not what tonight's about, but a contested election will be a particularly beneficial situation overall. So if anyone is still thinking about that, considering that, then please come and talk to us or contact us or whatever, and we'll be happy to talk about stuff. Kev on my left, unfortunately, is standing down, but he's put an interesting thing up on the Dons Trust board, Dons Trust website, I believe it is, with a little vlog about his experiences. So I'd urge anyone to listen to that and listen to the experiences of being on the board, because it's a very worthwhile activity. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
All right, moving on. Item 4, declaration of a poll vote on the 2 resolutions. So if it's okay with everyone, that's exactly what I'd like to do now as chair of the Dons Trust board, is to declare that these 2 resolutions will be voted through a poll vote, and that poll vote will open shortly as soon as we can make that happen, and it will happen online, and all members will get an email explaining how to participate in the vote. Please vote. We look forward to hearing what you think. We'd love to carry on this discussion during the next period while the vote is open, and should we reach the threshold, we will hold the confirmatory meeting in due course. Last item on the agenda is any other business, and if there is, I think we might be Tim. There's a few any other businesses.
Thank you, Tim Hillier. Yeah, it's a very unfortunate situation with the lifts out of order, but this room is not DDA compliant. If by the end of November the lifts aren't sorted, will the board look to host in a different venue?
Will the board what?
Will we get a different venue if the lifts are not fixed?
I think very much so. I think the situation we're in with the lifts is far from ideal, and on match days the club does its best to accommodate fans who need the lifts. It is not ideal for us tonight, and for as long as it continues, it will continue not to be ideal. I think we all understand and are sympathetic with the situation we're in, but it's something that we, as a trust and the club more particularly, needs to get fixed as quickly as possible. But I think we can say that we will be meeting, if there is a further meeting, we will do our best to make sure that we are meeting in an accessible place.
I think the difficulty is there isn't an obvious accessible place for these meetings, because we need the technology in here, we need the lights, the sounds, the internet. On the lifts, we are actively calling every day the lift engineers to try and fix it. So there's a lead time on the parts. For those of you who remember, there was a lift that was broken a year ago or so, and it was weeks and weeks and weeks before it got fixed. It's a nightmare. But the club are doing everything they can to try and get the lifts fixed.
Is it going to be possible to have the strategy document before the end of the voting period?
That's certainly the hope. I'm working closely with the person who's put the strategy document together for us on behalf of the club and the trust, and it's been, as I say, it's been signed off by the boards. It's about putting what is a really detailed strategy document into kind of shareable plain English, and kind of distilling it down. That's our hope, is to get it out, kind of, and I hate the word soon. Our hope is to get it out very soon, because it's really important for members. Certainly the intention.
On fundraising, has a levy on match day tickets been considered? to help pay the debt down, basically, and potentially even on retail as well. Has that been considered? Similar to where theatres and other venues charge levy to raise money, that could raise a significant amount of money if you thousands of tickets.
It's a really good question. I'm on the fundraising committee, which is chaired by Graham, who's not here today, so he'd probably jump in at this point, but to speak for him quickly, it's certainly something we used to do with our season tickets. We used to always have a £50 donation with our season tickets, and I think that was quite successful. I think it's one of the things that fundraising committee, as led by Graham, is exploring, along with a load of activities in and around the ground as well. And I think kind of some of those can't happen soon enough.
Jane, hello.
Hello? I just wanted to clarify something which I found out today, but I'm not sure other people are aware. There was advertised that there was going to be a meeting on Wednesday, a drop-in or something to do with finance. I understand it was part of the whole number of events that were happening across the whole RA voting. I understand that's now not happening on Wednesday. Can you just update on when that is and how, where?
Meet the DTB Wednesday the 6th.
Okay, there you go.
So it was supposed to be meet the DTB, and it was supposed to be this Wednesday, and that's been delayed until Wednesday the 6th.
Yeah.
I assume that'll come round on an email or something.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Nobody's told me about it.
So meet the DTB.
Yeah, but if it's on finance, that's all. I didn't know anything about it.
And we've also got, for any members in the room or online, we've also got an event for members aged 18 to 24 next week, where you can come and have thanks to Stu, come and have a tour of the stadium, and come and see the boardroom and have a chat about anything you want to talk about, Don's Trust or AFC related as well.
18 to 24 is not quite this demographic, but
I didn't say that.
I think we might, if there's no more questions, that might be enough for everyone tonight. I'd like to really thank everyone for giving up yet another evening to spend time listening to us and asking your questions. If you haven't had your question answered or you've got more, you can contact us or all our email addresses are on the Don's Trust website, and we'd be delighted to talk to you offline. And please come to some of our meetings. We're always at the kiosk on match days. And we're always here on match days. There are always people in here and in the boardroom on match days, so you'll be able to see people if you're up here in hospitality too. So thanks very much for coming along tonight, and we will see you again at the next one.